humans didn't have this concept of love that we have until very, very recently. Up until the Middle Ages, up until the Renaissance, if a couple was to get married, it would just be because they were the same age in the same community. So you'd have a boy who was 16 and a girl who was 16. It was just a given that they would be married. There was no romance, there was no courtship, there was nothing like that. It just was like he's available, she's available, and then the sort of other societies you'd have them where they would actually liberty. The parents would come together through matchmakers, like you'd have in Jewish society or in Hindus where you would actually bring them together and say, my daughter would be a good match with your son. But it was nothing to do with courtship, it was nothing to do with romance, it was nothing to do with, falling in love. Because literally, they're hormonally, they were not developed to the level we are because their basic instincts were about survival. If you have to work all day as a serf in Glastonbury Abbey, all the hours of the day, you haven't got time to have a romance with some girl. You don't. You're too tired, you're a slave, and she doesn't have it either because she's working all the time. It just didn't exist. But after, say, the Elizabethan times, and this guy came along, the Renaissance was a very interesting period in human history. Up until then, we basically had what I've talked about. What you still have in indigenous societies. You don't have love, you don't have romance, it doesn't exist. The Renaissance, I don't think people fully understand the impact of the Renaissance in terms of its effect upon human psychology and human behaviorism. Because what the Renaissance was what they saw it as was the return of the Roman Empire. It was the Renaissance of the Roman Empire. But it was a whole new way that they also saw of rebuilding the human race. And this happened everywhere. And the reason why this happened was they could do it. The world was changing very rapidly. Bruno Bettelheim had discovered perspective. That, if you could draw this room before perspective, that wall down there would be in the same place as you are, all flat. Look at the medieval paintings from the Middle Ages. The castle is here, the person's there. There's no difference in size. Then I think from father to head, the cows, these are close, these are far away. It was that kind of thing. Suddenly, people had perspective. They saw the world very, very differently. They could draw. They knew that when you were drawing this rule that you had to do that. All walls down there, smaller on the canvas, and then coming back to the larger ones here. So the perspective artificially created a feeling of depth. Never existed before Bruno Bettelheim. Imagine that. Imagine how when they saw that, how incredibly the impact that would have had on their psychology, just to see that. So then we had that came along, and they suddenly realised that the world was a different place. Then maps started getting really good, shipping started getting phenomenal. For the first time, since probably the Phoenicians, they could build really big ships. They could sail vast distances, but the difference was now they were getting good at maps. You had John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's court cartographer, magician, but cartographer he was phenomenal at maps, and he was also brilliant at developing navigation systems. And he plotted the coastline around these islands and through France, and that was the beginning of the British Empire. The ships going out, right? And we think about, like, in our time, ships going out to sea. Okay, it's no problem. You go on a ship, you go out to sea, right? But when in Elizabethan times, for a guy, say, from Glastonbury, or an Irish guy or a Scottish guy, to get on a ship and go to Africa, that would have been like getting on a spaceship and going to another planet. That would have, even to go to somewhere like Italy, would have been like going on a spaceship to another planet. Their whole life would have been this circumference. You understand? All they would know would be in this area. There was no big transport back then, and everyone they would know would be like someone in Somerset or someone in the west of Ireland or someone in Scotland. They wouldn't know what another human being was like.
If they were allowed out there.
If you were allowed out, but to meet an Italian would be, or to meet a Moor, or to meet an Arab, that would be like us meeting an alien. You understand? And they had to actually then change culture to get these people to embrace other cultures. And that's where Shakespeare came along. We don't really know who William Shakespeare was. He could have been an amalgamation of various writers. He could have been, we don't know. We do know there was a guy called William Shakespeare, but there's no proof that he actually wrote the books. So you have, what do you have then? Merchants of Venice. That introduces you to, you know, these all different races. Suddenly you learn about them. We have the beginning of this kind of, well, almost a stereotypical aspect, but it was also to get you used to it. The idea there were foreigners, that they had different ways, and this is how you deal with them. Just business, right? And then you would have these other things like Romeo and Juliet, and this gets really interesting, where they tried to imply that the Italians were a different race because they have this thing called romance. They have romance in the romantic countries, and you have to learn how to deal with romance because it makes these Italians do funny things. Right? Interesting, isn't it? So you had Romeo and Juliet, Romeo again, right? And you know, you had the story of the two families and all this stuff, and then you had this whole thing of like what romance was, and this would have been as alien to them as anything. What? He actually used to sit under this girl's balcony and sing to her and stuff like that. And he's willing to die for a woman, you know. And they were extrapolating, and then he wrote Julius Caesar, and he brought those same kind of concepts in it, and even in Hamlet, right? You had him talking about Ophelia. Ophelia was heartbroken because she couldn't reach Hamlet. He was pretending to be, you know, mentally insane. I don't know, that's another one, another pre-Raphaelite painting of Ophelia, famous one. It's around here somewhere, I'm sure. Very interesting stuff. They were culturally altering our minds. They were opening up our minds to new ways of thinking and new ways of living. And it was so successful and spread so quickly that it became a template that we've had ever since. Now that's not to say that couples before that didn't love each other. Of course they did. And they didn't love their kids. Of course they did. But they didn't have romance. They didn't have this thing of courtship and falling in love and all that stuff, which is brilliant. We all love that, right? But that's actually, it's like everything else that goes is great and not great at the same time because it comes with pain. And we had this idea was also a lot, that had to do with multiculturalism, to get, you know, people from these islands used to dealing with foreigners, dealing with their ways, and maybe even having relationships with them. You know, getting married to them, expanding the kingdoms, expanding the business, making sure maritime law was very successful. And these ships' captains would be going off all over the world on these little ships, and they would know all about the cultures through the Shakespearean stuff. They were a great advantage they had over the Spanish and the Portuguese. The Spanish and the Portuguese were not as good as dealing with foreigners as the British were. When the British, you know, you look at the Spanish when they went to Central America, Cortes, it was a bloodbath. They went there seeing the foreigners as almost like an insect that had to be wiped out. And boy, God, did they do it. You know, they did it. Now, the British were, to their credit, were more clever. The ruling classes here, they said, it's better we work with them. So that way we'll get them to work for us. So when the British conquered India, they didn't conquer India by force. They conquered India by making deals with all the different Rajas. And that's how they conquered India. Much more clever. Doesn't mean you have to send less troops out to fight, less conflicts, and you could just get down to the business of selling and buying stuff and moving products around the world. And that's what really killed the Spanish Empire and made the British Empire the great empire it was, because of this ability to culturally understand others, to culturally understand them, but also to alter their own people to fit in with the global culture that was developing. And globalization is not a new thing. It's been going on forever. So anyway, as I said, infatuation is to be made foolish, right? And loving your children is not foolish. Loving your pets is not foolish. But falling in love with a complete stranger is an incredibly dangerous thing. Incredibly dangerous when you think about it. You know, it's a nice idea, it's a lot of fun, but it can get you in a hell of a lot of trouble if it goes wrong. Big time. There's a lot to be said for relationships that develop over a slow period of time. But they don't want that. What they found out was that they could actually control people better if they actually had this idea of romance being tragic. Now, when you had a relationship in the past, it may have ended, And it made, remember our ideas of Cleopatra and Antony and her killing herself with the snake and all that, and how tragic it was. That wasn't from them. That was from later writers who romanticized. Remember, the Romantics, they romanticized these images, okay? But that probably wasn't how it was back then. Later on, come along the idea that the love song starts appearing. It really began with a phenomenal and fascinating group called the Cathars in southern France, who were a heretical sect who broke away from Christianity in the belief that the world we were living in hell, that the Pope and the Catholic Church was pure evil, and that's not what Jesus thought at all. They believed that Jesus was actually telling us that the world was ruled by an evil God, and your way out of this thing was you could actually be reincarnated, but your idea was to live a good life. Now these people developed their technology and their societies unbelievably fast. Incredibly fast. I mean, but in 13th century France, a woman could buy and sell property and divorce a man. That did not happen again in France until the rule of de Gaulle in the 1950s. Up until that point, that's how advanced they were. At the same time, European Catholics and other European groups were living in absolute dire circumstances. We had the Cathars giving a really high standard of living to their people. It was called The Perfect Heresy. There's a very good book by Sean Martin about that, The Perfect Heresy. And they actually had beliefs that were almost close to Buddhism, but one of the things they had was troubadours. You know the expression of troubadour. They came up with the idea of a troubadour. And a troubadour could be paid to woo a woman. So, for instance, a king or a knight, he wouldn't know how to pick up a girl. He wouldn't know how to do it. How do you do it, right? You'd pay this guy with a nice singing voice and a nice clothes, and he'd write a little song saying, Lord Watson, so-and-so thinks you're beautiful, he would like to have a family with you. Right? Brilliant stuff when you think about it, right?
Hide behind the curtain.
And that's where that began. That's where the love song began, paying a troubadour to go and and that still goes in Mexico with the mariachi bands when they go into the girls' window and stuff. Still goes on, right? Troubadour playing a song. The woman goes, he hired this guy for me. He must be a catch. If he hired these troubadours were like the rock stars of their time. They were paid lots of money, and they were like highly valued, and they could travel all over southern Europe to get gay. And a really good troubadour would be like Elvis. And so, I'm serious. So we hired the Elvis. So the troubadour Elvis. So the guy's hitting on you, right? All right. He sends the troubadour Elvis out, right? And you're thinking, this guy must be a catch. 2 reasons: 1, he went to this trouble, and 2, he must have a lot of money. You can hire him, he's got money.